What's up, everyone? Welcome to this week's edition of The Point. I'm your host, Ana Kasparian, and this week we're doing something a little different. Usually we have a two-person panel and we ask them what their points are. We talk about the viral news stories of the week. This week we're kind of going to do the same. However, I have one special guest who I'm going to interview, and then later on we're going to get to all the fun topics of the week. I invited Colin Wright back on the program because I was intrigued by his story, and I think that you guys will find his story just as interesting as I did. He is an author and a world traveler. In fact, he's created an entire business out of traveling around the world, and he is a very cultured, intelligent guy who has a lot of fun stories to share with us. Later on, as I mentioned, we'll get to the topics, including where our shrimp comes from. Okay, so if you're a shrimp lover in the U.S., there's some pretty terrible facts behind the scenes that we're going to tell you about. But before we get to all of that, Colin, I want to ask you some questions about your life.
Let's do it.
I want to know who you are. All right, Colin. So let's get started with the moment your life kind of took charge. And what I mean by that is at the age of 19, you realized you don't want to do things the way people typically do things. And you decided to kind of start your own business. What happened?
Yeah, well, I've always worked. I got my first job when I was like 11. And so I was always working for different people in different companies and trying out things. And I learned to work harder than most other people as a result. So at 19, I was working at a magazine in college, when I was in college, as one of my 5 jobs that I was using to put myself through school. And I had a couple of ideas, things that we might be able to do to better compete with the other magazines in town. And the boss, when I told him about it, he essentially said, "Know your place, kid."
Damn. Pay your dues, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, well, okay, I will. I mean, it's not here. My place is not here. And so I went and started my own magazine. And the idea wasn't to try to usurp or to try to show him, that I knew what I was doing. I really wanted to try out these ideas. It was something simple. It seems silly now. Let's do an online version of the magazine. But to him, it didn't make any sense. Why do it if it hasn't been done already? And for me, the idea of trying these things and seeing what happens was motivation enough.
That's so incredible. Well, as I get older and as I become more experienced in my own career path, I'm noticing more and more that if you listen to authority and you play by the rules, you're the least likely to succeed. Because there are gatekeepers to success, and if you're willing to abide by those gatekeepers, you're not going to get very far. So I love the fact that you knew what your passion was and you created something through your creative abilities. What kind of advice would you give to someone who wants to do the same thing, but they feel like they have certain obligations? They got to pay the bills, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. I would say know where your money's going to come from. And I was lucky that I had a bunch of other jobs at the time, and I was a student, so I could afford to be very poor and still kind of make my way through that lifestyle. But I would also say get accustomed to the idea of failure. For me, that magazine, it did really, really well, like in a very public way. And it was in all the newspapers, and people were like, "Young Wonderkind." And then it collapsed. I let so many people down, and it really just, in a very public fashion also, because people love a failure story, it was all over the place. And everything that I did wrong was made very clear. And what it turned out is I knew how to design a magazine and make a magazine, didn't know how to run a business. And learning that was a very difficult lesson. One I remember very distinctly, but the more important lesson for myself was that I can fail and get back up. And so if the worst should happen and this thing I'm going to try like utterly fails in such a public way, I know that I will pull inward for a second and allow myself to cry a little bit and then move forward and try something new.
So how did you recover from that? Like, is it just something in you? Are you just this resilient person who's not afraid of failure, or did it take some coaching?
It was a little bit of allowing myself to feel the pain for a moment, for a couple of days, just not seeing anybody, just staying inside my apartment, never wanting to leave again. But then realizing there was other stuff I wanted to do. Like there's a lot of things worth trying. And if I allow myself to have that ceiling and say, I'm never going to try because I might fail, what could I do? Like, you have the chance to fail with anything. And so accepting that and recognizing it and kind of making that your power, that you will be like a failure zombie where you'll get knocked down and come back up and cling and start crawling again. Even if you're just a torso and some arms, you'll still keep climbing. Like reflecting on that and realizing that it's a superpower in a way if you can do that. And then allowing yourself to try, yourself to try in situations where that might happen.
Yeah, you have the right mindset. And, a lot of people fail at a lot of things. And the way that I like to look at it is whenever I come across doubters, and I've had my fair share of doubters, or whenever I do fail at something, I use that as fuel to like fight harder, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I talked about this on the Young Turks once. I said something about how my haters kind of turn me on. And they don't turn me on sexually. Like I don't read these terrible comments about myself and be like, "Oh my God, I got to go in the room
Yeah.
and like rub one out." That's not how it goes. But I read those comments and I think, "Oh, you think I suck? Well, I'm going to show you," right? And I get
Yeah.
really like excited about proving myself. And you know, maybe it's different for you, but for me it is a what now bitch type of mentality. But I don't know. You seem a
That's a
lot
good
more
approach.
Yeah, you're a lot more calm when it comes to the failure than I am.
I tend to filter really
Mhm,
well in terms of comments. Like YouTube comments are pretty salacious and crazy. Like
Yes.
Amazon comments, like for your books, like these are things. Like I take a long. You put a lot of effort into these things, and
Yes.
then somebody comes in. And they're less likely to just say, like, to just spout profanity and something that has nothing to do with what's going on. They will tell you exactly why you are intellectually inferior in every way.
And that's tough.
And,
Yeah.
and you have to go through and filter it because sometimes there's some decent advice in there, like you actually did something that you could improve upon. But in a lot of cases, looking at the haters, you have to go through and say, is this for me or is this for them? Is this them making sure that they feel bigger by insulting somebody else, or is this actually intended for me? In which case, I can deal with a little bit of vitriol if it means growing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so you are living the dream. You are doing what people hope that they can do one day when they retire. You're traveling the world, you're seeing things, you're learning about different cultures, different people. How did that come about? And how do you finance something like that?
It's actually not as expensive as you'd think. I was living in LA almost 7 years ago, and I was running a branding studio, and things were going really well financially and business-wise. This was a big business success. Didn't have the epic failure, thankfully, but I found myself living kind of a version of the American dream, the work hard, play hard lifestyle, nice townhouse near the beach, and spending a whole lot more money than I was making, even though I was making a decent amount of money.
The American way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And kind of realized that it wasn't doing it for me. And taking a step back on my 24th birthday, like looking at the big picture for the first time in a very long time, I realized that I was going to end up like all of these mentors that I had. And they were wonderful people, and for them to teach me all of these things about business was wonderful, but they were very unhappy, really unfulfilled, and in most cases their families hated them and they were unhealthy. Like everything about their life other than business, they were failing at cataclysmically. Like those muscles had atrophied. And I didn't want that. And I recognized that and acknowledged it for the first time and realized something needed to change. And kind of the long story short of it is that I gave myself 4 months in which to change everything and scaled down my business to something I could run from my laptop and got rid of everything that I owned that didn't fit into carry-on luggage, which is like a walk-in closet full of clothes and 8 computers that I had for some reason, and the car and the townhouse and everything, paid off all of my debt, and I started a blog like one does when you have no idea what you're doing with your life. And I started writing about these things, this transition, the things that I wanted to do. The main one was travel. I was 24. My dream was to travel. I was ostensibly earning all of this money so I could travel the world. I had never left the country.
Wow.
I always
So
had-
at 24, you hadn't left the country yet.
There was always more important things to do, but we show our priorities by how we act, by what we actually spend our time on. And I wasn't showing my priorities. So I decided that I would figure out a mechanism to travel, set up, I had no idea where to go, though. So I set up on my blog a voting form so people could vote on what country I would move to. And like almost 7 years later, I still do it the same way. And I fund it now, though, through my books. I write full time. I've written 30 some odd books on a bunch of different topics. I have all of my time to spend on this, though. So thankfully, I have a lot of time to sit and edit and design the covers and do all of that.
That's incredible. So you write your books. That's how you're financing all this traveling that you do. The traveling then gives you experiences you can write about.
Exactly.
So you keep your fans happy, your readers happy. That's really incredible. And you are doing something that I think is really important. It's really difficult to publish a book, right? Especially if you're not like some hotshot, big name person who has hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter. I've tried to publish a book, and again, there are those gatekeepers to success.
Oh, yeah.
But you were able to kind of bypass those gatekeepers by creating your own publishing company. How did that come about?
Well, I found myself, gosh, it would have been 6 years ago. In New Zealand, I was in a place where I couldn't do business because the internet is so terrible. The country's gorgeous, but the internet is a travesty. They're still doing dial-up internet while I was living there. And so I spent more time on these books and thought they might be a valid way to make a living. I was able to do it in a lot of ways because I had already accrued an audience for my blogging, which I wasn't making any money off of directly, but you can, in some cases, take these audiences and say, hey, you're willing to pay attention to this. Maybe you'd like a longer format version. It's a couple of bucks.
Yep.
Did that a couple of times. Didn't really know what I was doing again. It was like a trial by fire type of learning process. But I did it enough that 8 months later, I was able to pay all of my bills with the revenue from my books. And so I stopped doing all of the brand consulting that I was doing. And then I met up with a couple of friends of mine who were former readers, actually, who were able to make a living off of their books as well. And we realized we had the same philosophy on publishing, which is that it's changing. We should figure out kind of asymmetric means of approaching it. And we had the same philosophy on business and the people that we wanted to work with. And so we formed Asymmetrical Press and pooled our resources, and we were able to kind of amplify that indie publishing business model.
That's incredible. And has the publishing company been successful?
Yeah, oh, it's been great. In terms of the brand has like grown, and a lot of people want to work with us. We're scaling slowly so we can make sure that we do well by everybody.
Right.
But the people that we work with and the types of work that we produce, that's the way that we gauge it. And yeah, really happy with the authors that we publish, and really happy
That's
with what we're able
awesome.
to do as a result.
Well, maybe I need to give you a call because I have some ideas, if you know what I mean. But that's awesome. That's really good to hear. All right, let's get back to your traveling just a little bit. Really fascinated to hear which country you enjoyed the least. You've been all over the place.
Oh.
It doesn't have to be a country other than the U.S.
Right, right. Yeah, the U.S. states themselves are like individual countries.
Yes,
like
they are.
We've got a huge, almost like a European Union within our own borders. It's difficult because every place is like amazing and terrible for different reasons, and everybody has pros and cons. Within the U.S., there's a lot of things I don't like and think we could do better. A lot of things I think we do better than anybody else. One of the places I usually list as both my favorite and least favorite is India. Living in Calcutta was a very different experience than a lot of other parts of India as well. But it is kind of the city left behind, and the people there are amazing, and the food is amazing. The infrastructure and the politics there are a travesty, and some of the worst I've seen anywhere in the world in terms of corruption and the way in which they let things fall apart and let the people, especially at the bottom of the totem pole, suffer.
Wow, that's incredible. How long were you in that area?
I lived in Calcutta for 5 months.
Wow, okay. And usually that's what you do when you travel. You'll be there for about 4 months.
Yeah, typically three to 5 months, depending on what I can manage with my visas.
So you've been to college, and I would argue that getting educated in a formal institution here in the U.S. is nothing compared to the education you get when you travel around the world.
Yeah, I think it's different. Like, I have a lot of friends who didn't go to university and just started traveling or started their own businesses. I think that's perfectly legitimate, a great way to learn as well, and you learn very different things. I had a really good experience. I was still paying off debt up until I left LA. But I learned a lot of philosophy that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. Like real world practical stuff. I didn't make a cent off of what I learned in college. That I had to learn from the jobs I was working to pay for college. But I did learn a lot of philosophies that are not practical, but have been very useful in learning more about myself and learning about the world later.
That's awesome. I love your story. You guys should definitely check out his work, his books, obviously, his blog. Where is your blog? Where can people find it?
The blog is exilelifestyle.com, and the books are at colin.io.
Awesome. You guys should definitely check that out. As some of you guys know, being on social media constantly can be negative for your mental health. There have been a number of studies that prove that if you're on Facebook considerably, usually you will suffer some form of depression, even if it's a very mild form. And it's because we end up comparing ourselves to other people. Well, Ed Sheeran decided that he needed to take a little bit of a break from social media, and he let his fans know on a recent Instagram post. He wrote the following: "Hello all, I'm taking a break from my phone, emails, and all social media for a while. I've had such an amazing ride over the last 5 years, but find myself seeing the world through a screen and not my eyes. So I'm taking this opportunity of me not having to be anywhere or do anything to travel the world and see anything I missed. To my family and friends, if you love me, you will understand me buggering off for a bit. To my fans, the third album is on its way and is the best thing I made thus far. See you all next autumn, and thank you for being amazing, Ed." I love that he's doing this. I think that taking a few days off social media does help your mental health a little bit. I just recently did that this past weekend. Didn't go on Instagram, didn't go on Twitter, Facebook, none of that. And I noticed that I was paying closer attention to the relationships I'm in. I was much more engaged. So I think that this is healthy, and people should do what they can to avoid social media and email, at least during the weekends or on your days off. What do you think? Make your point.
Yeah, I think it's valuable too. And I've done
Yeah.
this a few times. I went for a year without a smartphone to see what that
Damn.
was like. And then I've done multiple digital sabbaticals is the key word people are using for that these days.
That's
If you
hilarious.
blog about it, you take a digital sabbatical, and that can mean different things, maybe just the smartphone, maybe your email, maybe the internet. I agree, it gives you the excuse and the predisposition to actually take in more from your immediate environment, including the relationships, and just internalization. So you're sitting on the bus, have nothing to do, you're thinking rather than distracting and pacifying.
Yep.
I would argue the biggest benefit for me, though, has been recognizing which things I actually miss and which things are actually useful and relevant. So when I go back to having a smartphone again, I use it far more intentionally.
Oh, that's smart. I like that. Yeah, I have a very strict rule. Well, I don't know if it's a strict rule because we do break it all the time. But you know, when I'm with someone, like if I'm having dinner with a friend, the phone is off, or at least the ringer's off. It's in my purse, and I don't look down at it. If I'm having a date night or a special moment with my fiance, like I'm not going to grab my phone and do that. And honestly, in my last relationship, I did it quite a bit, and he did it quite a bit, and it ended up being a very negative experience for us.
Were you like tweeting at each other at the dinner table?
No, but we weren't doing that. We were just completely in our own worlds as we were sitting there with one another, and so it really kind of scales back on the quality time
Yeah,
when
totally.
you're with someone.
Together but apart.
Exactly, exactly. All right, well, here's the personal question for the story. When you're in a rut, what do you do when you need inspiration or motivation?
I mean, I'm pretty fortunate in that my lifestyle has this built in, that I'm exposed to new things and novelty all the time, just by virtue of moving to these new places and never knowing what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And so I have a very shallow learning curve a lot of the time, because so much of it's easy to pick up by default. But you can do the same thing, I think, expose yourself to new things, and as a result, experience a burst of creativity just by changing the genre of music that you're listening to on Spotify, or hanging out with a new friend, taking a different route to work. Like little
Yep.
things can make you see the world in a different way temporarily and give you that burst of creativity.
That's such a great point. So I agree with you 100%. Recently, I felt like I was in a little bit of a rut because you get used to a routine.
Right.
That's what a rut is, getting used to a routine and feeling like there's nothing to look forward to, nothing to be excited about. And so on a Monday night, a friend invited me to go to salsa, like a salsa club, and have like some Cuban food and dance. And usually on a Monday night, I'm like, no, I gotta work, and I probably shouldn't. But then I was like, why don't I just go? I know I'm gonna have a good time. The hard part is getting me out of the house, and it broke me out of the monotonous routine that I'm so used to. And then I feel like it kind of set the tone or set the mood for the rest of the week. And now I feel inspired and I feel more creative. I'm in a better mood.
Yeah.
So yeah, do something fun for yourself. Go for a hike, you know, find a new hobby. Those things really do help, like, motivate you in other areas of your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, tell us what you guys think. Comment in the section below and tell us what you do to stay motivated, and what do you do to get yourself out of a rut. We do want to hear from you, so comment in the section below, and we'll see you soon. Climate change continues to be a hot button issue that a lot of countries, including the U.S., aren't doing enough about. However, almost 200 countries came together in Paris, and they agreed that there needs to be a goal of lowering greenhouse emissions to do something about climate change, at least mitigate the impact of climate change. Now, the climate change agreement was prepared over the course of 2 years, including 2 intense weeks of meetings in Paris. The deal is meant to add structure to efforts that are already underway to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Nearly every country has submitted a plan, and I want to show you guys a quick chart of what the goal is. Now, if we do absolutely nothing whatsoever, by the year 2030, or actually 2100, Jesus Christ, that's a long time away, but not that long away, the temperature, or the climate, I should say, is likely to increase to 3.8 degrees Celsius, which is not good. Okay, but when you look at what we're attempting to do with these new changes, it could be 2.7. And if it's 2.7, we're still not doing enough. The current agreements still don't do enough. We need to be at less than 2, okay? And you see that in 2 degrees Celsius. You see that on that chart right there. Again, the agreement which is non-binding, which doesn't really have any real consequences set in place to punish these countries, isn't going to do enough. We need to go further. Now, the Paris deal will become official when at least 55 countries that account for 55% of global emissions have come to a formal agreement. So, for instance, that could possibly mean that China, the United States, Europe, India, and Russia all come on board. And of course, there are other factors related to international relations that could play a role in whether or not people abide by these rules, even set these goals in the first place. It's not looking too good, but I'm glad that the conversation is being had. What do you think about this, Colin? Make your point.
I agree that the conversation is probably the most impactful and important part of this. Because very seldom do you pass something, you say, okay, now we're all going to do this. No punishment if you don't, but we're all going to do this. And then people are like, okay, yeah, let's just all do this. That makes perfect sense because we don't have constituents or anything that we think will not like us if we tax them at higher rates.
Right.
So I don't think we can expect too much just from that agreement, but I do think that it represents good things in terms of changing attitudes, because there's a lot of reasons, not just the temperature, average temperature increase, but a lot of reasons to not pollute the planet, the environment, and to try to keep things at a sustainable level. And so this represents an attitude shift that I think then will correlate over to individuals, but also companies and corporations, which I think will have a much larger impact on the ground.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders got a lot of heat during the last Democratic debate because he said something about how climate change is going to lead to perpetual war, right? It's the biggest national security threat. And people thought that was a crazy thing to say, but it's actually very much true. Climate change is starting to really destroy our limited resources, and that includes agriculture. And so if countries are fighting for these resources, I mean, we're going to go to war over what we're doing to the environment, what we're doing to this planet. So it's an important issue. I like that the conversation is being had, but we need to go further.
Yeah. Amen.
Yes. So here's the question. How do you contribute to help save the environment?
Oh gosh, well, I hold accords and invite 200 countries to come. No, I mean, usually, like all an individual can do typically is kind of pay attention to what you do as an individual. So in terms of recycling and buying things in a way that's very intentional, I mean, some of it actually matters, some of it is more the idea of it. Like recycling in some places actually ends up costing more or polluting a little bit more, but over time it grows and turns into something really useful. I think now that we all have voice boxes, we all have these megaphones, social media and blogs and things like this, using that in some way to change attitudes is probably even more impactful than like recycling your Starbucks cup.
Yep.
So recognizing things that we can do on an individual scale, little things like that then maybe over time will snowball.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if all of us do our part, we could really, really cause some serious damage to climate change and positive damage. You know what I mean by that. That was weird phrasing. But I mean, I pretty much do similar things as you when it comes to climate change. I should do more. So I know that eating red meat contributes to climate change quite a bit.
That's a good one,
and
yeah.
it's really difficult for me to give it up, but my red meat consumption has gone down so much. I'll only eat it very, very rarely. Another thing that I like to do is whenever I can walk somewhere instead of drive, or whenever I can ride my bike somewhere, I'll do that. I try to recycle, just these little things that I hope add up in the end. I had a hybrid car at one point, but then I really wanted the car that I have now that's not a hybrid car. Maybe the next time I lease, I'll go back to electric or hybrid.
It's a good point, though, like mass transit, encouraging things on the local level. That's something that we actually can impact probably, and our votes actually do matter on that type of thing.
That's exactly right. I mean, I moved closer to work because, A, I have road rage. I couldn't deal with the traffic anymore. But also, I knew that it just wasn't good for the planet for me to commute an hour and a half each way to work. So now I'm closer, and, I'm going to start trying to ride my bike to work.
Okay. That'll be exciting.
We'll see about that. We'll see about that. Anyway, tell us what you guys are doing to help mitigate or at least prevent climate change from getting worse. Comment in the section below. Tell us what you think, and we'll see you soon. Some good news out of Saudi Arabia. As you guys know, women don't have a lot of rights in the country. However, recently they were not only allowed to start voting in elections, they're also allowed to run as candidates and get elected. Now, for the first time, women in Saudi Arabia voted, and 20 women were voted into public office. Now, don't get too excited because the election was for 2/3 seats in councils that have no lawmaking or national powers. But we're starting a conversation, okay? We're making some progress. It's crazy that Saudi Arabia is so behind when it comes to things like this, but they are. Now, 130,000 women registered to vote and 978 ran as candidates in this historic election. There are about 1.35 million registered male voters in the country, just to kind of compare the two genders. Saudi Arabia is the last country in the world to open its ballots to women. So that's what's going on. Now, remember, women cannot drive in Saudi Arabia. Authorities in the country have still not changed their minds on that issue. And the country's Grand Mufti described women's involvement in politics as, quote, opening the door to evil. Okay, so all these evil countries running around letting women vote. They're crazy.
Yeah, that's the real problem.
I know, that's the real problem, right? Giving women a voice. We need to stop that. I have very strong feelings about Saudi Arabia, mostly because of the fact that the U.S. gives Saudi Arabia a pass when it comes to everything, including human rights violations and, you know, some of the ways that they torture and murder their own people for breaking laws, especially their religious laws. And we still do business with them because we want their oil, and we'll turn a blind eye to anything that they might do that we find objectionable in any other country.
Right.
Right. So I like that there's some progress on this front. I think it's laughable that they're running for positions that have no power and people are celebrating that. Give the people the power. That doesn't just mean women. That means men and women. And when you have a fundamental interpretation of a religion and you use that fundamental interpretation in order to run a country, you have human rights violations like this.
By default, yeah.
Yes. So make your point, Colin.
Yeah, well, so I agree. I would add something, though, that it's very, very easy to get frustrated, because it is frustrating, obviously, and ideally we want it to be a different situation. But I tend to look at it a little bit optimistically, because within the context of Saudi Arabia, this is huge. And within our context, it's nothing. It's like, come on, guys, do a little bit more than this. But within that context, a shift like this is a major thing. And it could lead to more shifts down the line. But even this little movement within a context where they weren't able to participate in any way, that's a big deal. And so I tend to look at it, I try to look at it at least from the context of where it actually is, because we have completely different standards here, thankfully. And even though it's not perfect, it's closer to what we believe in morally. So looking at it from that standpoint, it actually is a really great thing to see, and I'm hoping that it continues to move in that direction.
Yeah, glass half full, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Rational optimism.
All right, I like that. All right, do you think it's good to encourage all people to vote, even if they're not necessarily educated on the issues or the candidates? Now, here in the U.S., just to give you a little more context, we urge everyone to vote, even if they have no idea what's going on. Do you think that's good for a democratic process?
I've gone back and forth on this, and I actually just changed my mind on it a couple of months ago. I haven't voted for a while. I haven't really felt the need to. I didn't feel like my vote mattered or counted, and I didn't feel I was as educated as I should be to vote. Like, I'm out of the country all the time. I have no idea who a lot of the local politicians are, things like that. But my mind has changed a little bit because of the fact that we all have megaphones now, and the fact that if enough people of a certain age demographic vote, even if their vote in that matter doesn't really matter, politicians tend to cater to them more as they're making decisions because they know what's popular, they know who their constituents are, and those statistics matter. So the numbers of people who come out and vote actually do matter, even if the votes themselves don't. So for me, I will be voting. I'll be encouraging other people to vote for whoever. Yeah. But I want more young people to get out and vote in particular, so that we will be catered to in the way that like boomers and Gen Xers are right now.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, in an ideal scenario, I would ensure that, or at least encourage everyone to pay attention to what's happening in the world. It's impacting you. And so you have some political power, you have some clout, and you could change the system that's kind of holding you down right now. So in a perfect world, that would happen. But we don't live in a perfect world, and we don't have perfect information, right? Now, thankfully, the internet has opened the floodgates to information that's so important to be a responsible member of the democratic process. But not everyone's intellectually curious, and not everyone has the resources to sit down and learn all the issues. With that said, I'm still on the fence. I've had some pretty strong comments in the past about how I don't think people who are ignorant on the issues should vote. I'm still leaning in that direction, I gotta be honest with you, because I see way too many people in middle America voting against their own best interests because they have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
The poorest people in the country continuously voting for the politicians that will tax them, their fair share, but won't tax corporations
Right,
what
right.
they're supposed to be taxed. And it's the most frustrating thing in the world.
I can definitely understand
Yeah.
that argument.
Yeah. So tell us what you guys think. I'm sure a lot of you disagree with me. I want to hear your thoughts, so comment in the section below, and we'll see you guys soon. A publication known as Stop the War has had a third article taken down from its site because the article promoted war with Israel. Now, it's interesting that the name of this publication is Stop the War, and then they're promoting war with Israel. But we have a screenshot of the article in question, and then we're going to talk about the details of it. Now, they apparently believe that American mosques and Islamic centers well, they don't believe this is true. American mosques and Islamic centers have seen at least 63 acts of vandalism, harassment, and anti-Muslim bigotry this year. The attacks include a pig's head thrown at a mosque, a pregnant Muslim woman being shoved in the stomach at a restaurant, and an Uber driver who was shot by a passenger, okay? So this anti-war group, Stop the War Coalition, is in hot water because they deleted this controversial article calling for war with Israel. This is the third article where they've done this. Not promoting war with Israel, but just questionable articles that have gotten a lot of criticism. So the headline says, time to go to war with Israel as the only path to peace in the Middle East. The other articles were legitimacy war, combining the mobilization of a movement from below with global solidarity is the best prospect for realizing Palestinian self-determination. I mean, there's just all this weird talk about how we need to go to war with other countries in order to lead to peace. It's almost Orwellian in nature, right?
Yeah.
More peace, more war leads to peace, like that whole notion, which I don't agree with. U.S. foreign policy seems to think that that's the way to go, but it hasn't worked. And so they've taken this down, but apparently they don't realize how the internet works. Once you post something like this, whether it be a questionable political commentary piece or a naked picture, it will float around forever. And so you have to really be thoughtful in what you're calling for. If you're calling for war and you are a publication that doesn't want war, well, maybe you need to scale back a little bit and figure out what your priorities are. I haven't read the entire article. I don't think that going to war with Israel is the way to solve peace in the Middle East. I think there are other ways of doing it. Maybe you stop doing drone strikes that kill innocent civilians and then lead to them getting, radicalized. But I don't know. That's just my take. What do you think, Colin? Make your point.
I don't know that war is ever really the answer. I think in certain circumstances, like defensive war perhaps, I mean, it makes sense to maintain the ability to do that just in case. But the idea of going to war with somebody to achieve peace is ridiculous. There's a lot of different mechanisms that can actually achieve peace. The big one here, I think, particularly in that region, is the othering of each other. Like there's so much, I have friends from both sides who just say, yeah, and peace, but that side, they're the ones that did it. And both of them say the exact same things about each other. And this is a microcosm of what's happening elsewhere around the world. And if we were able to spread culture, share culture a little bit better, recognizing our shared humanity first rather than looking at all the differences, even like exchange programs where kids for a year of their life have to go live in another country or something, there's a lot of interesting solutions to this problem that would stop it before it even got to that boiling point.
Yeah, that's such a great point. The thing about what's happening in the Middle East that really frustrates me is the answer continuously from our politicians seems to be, we need to bomb them. We need to kill them. And the thing is, so many innocent people are dying in the Middle East because of our questionable foreign policy.
Right.
And it's leading to people getting radicalized because they feel like they're being victimized by the West. They feel like they're being disenfranchised by the West. And that encourages them to join ISIS, to join these insurgencies that are causing a lot of damage. The best way to take the power away from ISIS is to work with moderate Muslims to fight back against them with the West. And unfortunately, that's not what we're doing. By the way, a recent poll indicates that Americans are 4 times more likely than people from any other country to state that sometimes killing civilians is necessary.
God, that's horrible.
And I know, it's terrible, and it was disheartening. Now, what do you think it'll take for us to end this violence against Muslims here in the United States and, abroad?
You actually said part of it, I think, that we need better representation of moderate Muslims. Like I hear all these attacks and people say Muslims this, Muslims that. That's not my experience with people who are Muslim. Like they are just as likely and just as unlikely to prescribe to violent ideologies as anybody else. It's just whether or not you're a psychopath.
Yeah.
And what we should be, turning our heads against and trying to unite against is psychopathy in terms of people with power, people with weapons, that type of thing. The religion, any philosophy, like non-belief system philosophy, can be used as an excuse for violence.
Yes.
So that's not the thing that we should be fixating on. I think in this case, the religion correlates with a certain color of skin, a certain part of the world, and it's a very convenient other for us to use as a distraction for a lot of other things.
Yeah, if you just consider the fact that they're humans just like us, and if you instill some empathy in American culture, I think things will be different. But we lack empathy. We look at them as others. We don't look at them as humans. And so when you have a huge chunk of Americans saying that it's okay to kill civilians in the Middle East because, hey, that's what we need to do to fight terror, you are terribly mistaken.
Right.
Because again, just put yourself in their shoes. You're at a wedding. And some unidentified country, let's just say Japan for the sake of this conversation, Japan decides that they're going to do a drone strike at that wedding in an effort to find terrorists, and they kill all of your innocent family members who haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
You as a surviving family member, what do?
You're pissed off.
You're pissed off.
You want to get revenge.
You want revenge. Our foreign policy doesn't work, and our politicians know that. I know this sounds conspiratorial, but there is an incentive to be in perpetual war. Yep. We have weapons manufacturers that are making a lot of money off of this. We have private contractors that are making a lot of money off of this. So when you see those politicians standing there during the debates talking about how they want to fight ISIS, they're being disingenuous, because if they really wanted to fight ISIS, they would change the course of what we're doing foreign policy-wise. And they have no interest in that.
They want to expend weapons.
That's exactly right.
What they're saying.
It's so frustrating. Global supermarkets are selling shrimp that's being farmed in countries like Thailand. But little do you know, the shrimp you're eating is probably not good for you because of the conditions that it's being farmed in, or they're being farmed in. And also, the people who are peeling these shrimp are working in unsafe work conditions and aren't being paid nearly enough. Now, Thailand quickly dominated the market and now sends nearly half of its supply to the United States. The Associated Press investigated one shrimp peeling factory in Bangkok, or a number of them, I should say, and they found that one factory was enslaving dozens of workers, and all three sheds held 50 to 100 people each. Many were locked inside. The Associated Press article says the following: inside the large warehouse, toilets overflowed with feces, and the putrid smell of raw sewage wafted from an open gutter just outside the work area. Remember, this is the shrimp you're eating, okay? Young children ran barefoot through suffocating dorm rooms. Entire families labored side by side at rows of stainless steel counters piled high with tubs of shrimp. Now, if you're reading this story or you're hearing about this and you think, oh, it's probably not impacting me and the shrimp I eat, I shop at Whole Foods. Well, it turns out that this shrimp does end up at supermarkets like Whole Foods. It also ends up at Kroger. There are big restaurants like Olive Garden and Red Lobster that usually serve this type of shrimp. And again, it's probably not the healthiest shrimp if it's being peeled in a place where feces is everywhere and these people are working in unfair and unsafe conditions. It's terrible, and this is honestly what happens with a lot of the food we eat.
Yeah.
And a lot of the clothing we wear. Colin, make your point.
It is a travesty, and unfortunately, I think we're going to find out a lot more about this type of thing before we solve it, because we're living in a world that's so globalized and so interconnected. There's so many strands leading and tangling into every single rope that you see at the end of the line. You see the finished product, but you don't see those strands. And that has continued unabated without the infrastructure and the interfaces to actually know what's going on, except to the people who are at those strand levels. And so what I hope will happen is that we'll recognize this, continue to publicize it so people are aware of what's going on, and then we create systems, whether they're governmental or non-governmental, to actually go in and make sure that this doesn't happen at every step of that process, so that you can go in, take a look at where your food, where your shoes, where your oil, where your whatever's coming from, track it from beginning to end, and actually use that as a decision, use that as one metric when you're deciding what to buy.
Yeah, that's really smart. Is there anything that you consume or purchase that you know is the product of questionable labor.
I try so hard, when possible, to do like the buy local. That's not possible like 80% of the time.
Yep.
And in some countries, you're buying local, and it's local
Slave
is
labor.
sweatshops and slave labor and things. So like it's really disconcerting to know that things like chocolate and rubber and like really common things that occur, it's just like with the shrimp, where it's such a tangle of strands leading back to it that I'm sure I'm eating stuff and consuming stuff and buying stuff that's made by slave labor, but I have no way of knowing, and that's even more insidious in a way.
Well, there is a lack of transparency in the U.S. when it comes to a number of things we consume, including the food we eat. Look, I'm not necessarily against GMOs. I'm against companies like Monsanto because of some of their actions, right? I don't think GMOs are going to destroy us or make us unhealthy. However, it's interesting that we don't have the right to know when we're eating genetically modified foods in the U.S., right? So that's just one example of something that kind of frustrates me when there's a lack of transparency. But I agree with you. It's nearly impossible to avoid either eating or using something that's the product of slave labor. And we as consumers need to demand the information, demand the transparency, and know what we're getting ourselves into. With that said, there have been cases in the past where I knew that something I was buying was probably not a good idea to buy, but I caved. And it's usually when I buy something from like Forever 21, and and I know that that cheap garment was made by someone in China,
The
and
fast
they are
fashion.
not exactly the fast fashion, and there's a high price to that. And I'm doing my best to not cave. I haven't bought anything from Forever 21 in a long time.
Yeah, and the counter to that, thankfully, as we see that fast fashion thing and the equivalent in food and every other industry, we're also seeing the pushback from the other side, where for every Forever 21, there's like an Everlane where they actually show you where every dollar goes, and they show you like feeds of their factories and like relationships with the vendors. That type of thing, I think, will become more common because it actually does become a value proposition. It's something that they can sell on. I would rather buy from them, even if I saw an equivalent garment somewhere else, I'd rather pay a few more dollars for something from them because I know where it's going, whereas with a fast fashion brand, you have no idea.
You have no idea, right? And I love that you mentioned the other brands. I mean, American Apparel had its controversial issue with its former CEO, but their clothing is made in the U.S. and it's good quality. There's Madewell. There's lots of other options out there. They're pricier, but, you know, Colin has the right mindset when it comes to being a consumer. When you're going to spend that money, you know, be a minimalist, but make sure you spend the money on something that's good quality, that's going to last you, that's ethically made.
Right, right. Buy less of better, basically.
Exactly, and I love that. All right, guys, tell us what you think. Comment in the section below and tell us what you think about this shrimp story. Maybe you are also guilty of buying things that you know that you shouldn't buy. We love reading your stories. So comment in the section below, and we'll see you soon. Hey guys, I have an awesome new announcement for you. Turns out that The Point will be hosted on the video platform Watchable.com. All you have to do is go to Watchable.com and search for The Point, and boom, you'll see our videos, you'll see our content, and we really want to make sure that The Point is available on all these different and awesome, great platforms. So take a look, tell us what you think, and we'll see you soon.